Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of our program. With me today are two of our regular commentators. On my right is Regena Nelson, and Regena is in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies at Western Michigan University. And on my left is Felix Brooks, we have any affiliations for you right now? You had many in the past.
Adjunct for the university right now.
That's right. So we'll say you're an adjunct professor of sociology at this point. So welcome to both of you. Don Cooney is off on assignment, as they say, not with us today. Don seems to have this other job that takes up a lot of his time. What is it? City commissioner, right? So I think Don got caught up in some city business today. But we're going to forge ahead, and this is our first program for the new year, for 2025. And so Happy New Year to everybody, first of all. And of course, we're taping this program on January 24th. So we're just days into the new Trump administration, the second Trump administration. And of course, we've been hit with an avalanche of actions and executive orders on the part of the Trump administration. And they very, very deliberately wanted to create an avalanche at the beginning. They used the concept of shock and awe, the military term, where you have the initial bombardment of a country to create chaos and fear and soften them up to then go in and do other military maneuvers against them. Or as Steve Bannon puts it, I probably can't say this on the air, but flood the zone with BS. Flood the zone. And so they're definitely flooding the zone. They're creating this avalanche. They're trying to create this shock and awe. They want to really, really put their imprint on and show us they're going to be in charge, and they're going to pound us into the dirt with their executive orders and their new administrative actions. So that's been going on. So I thought today we could sort of take a step back. We talked a little bit about Trump's election, the last program that we had, tried to analyze a little bit about that, and anticipated what might be happening now, but now we're actually into it. So, and we have some things that they've already tried to do that I think we can try to assess and point out. Aside from the shock and awe, we do have to take seriously the kinds of things that they're trying to do. And I think that there's going to be tremendous pushback and resistance to a lot of this. A lot of it's going to happen in the courts.
Right.
A lot of it's just going to happen in terms of social activism. But let's first of all kind of take a look at what are some of these things they're throwing at us. Regena, I have you as the leadoff hitter today.
Sure.
Your reactions to the new administration and all these different executive actions that they're taking and the tone they're setting?
Yeah, I know we'll be discussing them kind of one by one today. And then, but the first one that came out of the gate was the attack on the birthright citizenship, overriding the 14th Amendment, that if you're born in the U.S., that you have citizenship here. And so he immediately told everybody that this is not going to be the case, that this is part of his mass deportation plan, is to start to look at these children who are now going to be born. So you're talking to these moms right now who are carrying children, who are very worried about what's going to happen to their child if this is actually enforced, that my child will not have right to services. They won't have any citizenship because they can't go back to where we're from, and they're not allowed here. And how is this going to play out? So we already seen people saying that's absolutely not correct, and that's not going to happen, and countering that. So we've already had one federal Supreme Court already put judge already say that challenged that. So we'll see. We're already seeing the resistance. And the thing is, when you look at public opinion and people's ideas about the people who support this mass deportation, they're saying, yes, we don't want illegal people here illegally who are committing crimes. We understand that. We want things to be safe. But the means and how you're doing it, if you look at the polls, the majority do not support this. So this is going to be challenged, I think, publicly. You're going to see pushback by the average citizen, but then there's also resistance by the courts. And so that makes me feel good that people aren't just going to accept this.
The federal district judge said that it was blatantly unconstitutional.
Right.
He said he'd never had a case in front of him that was so clear to decide on, that this was blatantly unconstitutional. No president has the power and authority to delete a section of the Constitution or to take away a constitutional right on a whim, on an executive order. There's a process that's been long established by which we can amend the Constitution if we choose to do so, but it requires 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the states, either through state legislatures or state conventions, to achieve that. And of course, that process has not even been started on this particular issue. And so again, as soon as Trump did this, I thought this is, again, I agree with the judge, blatantly unconstitutional and is just not going to stand. So that's one of the things. And then of course, as you mentioned, that ties into the mass deportation issue. So Felix, your reaction, what do you take away from this first week?
I think he knows that, if we go back to the birthright citizenship, he knows that's not going to fly in the course, but it's a message to his base that this is what I was talking about during campaigning, and this is what I'm going to do when I become president. He knows that he can't do it from a constitutional standpoint, but it's also a message about, which is what they've been talking about all along, is who gets to be an American. To me, that's the big piece. What they're saying is, these people aren't really Americans. They're not like us. And therefore, by fiat, I'm going to make sure that we don't get any more of those folks like this. So that's part of what he's doing here. I think he understands clearly that this is not going to pass constitutional muster, but that's up to the courts to decide. It's just like his proclamation when he did about a total Muslim ban, red meat for his base. I followed through on what I said I was going to do because it plays to their prejudices and their priors. The other thing that in terms of the overall thrust of what he did when he came in office is, again, their game plan is, like you said, to put as much out there as they possibly can. Doesn't matter whether it stands legal scrutiny or not. These are the things that we say that we stand for. I'm talking to him on base. Because think about it. He has the inaugural speech, but then he has a separate speech that he gives just to his supporters. Well, the optics of that spoke volumes about who he really cares about. And it all ties into, as you said, to the whole immigration and mass deportation, that this is us. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. All those other people on the outside, we just assume push them away. And people seem to be, quote, happy about that in his inner circle. So if you look at that stage up there, when I was watching the inauguration, all the rich folks were up there, all the big names.
Right.
Not even state governors were in that first tier. It was all Elon Musk and the head of Google or Alphabet. All those folks, they were sitting in the front chairs.
Bezos, the Amazon guy, and who's the Meta guy?
Zuckerberg.
Yeah. The tech bros, the tech billionaire bros.
That all capitulated in advance without even being asked, because they could see what the atmosphere was going to be like. They decided, we'll just throw our hat in with him.
Yeah. We'll go kiss the ring and be part of the. And Musk, of course, is literally the second president in terms of his presence, his influence, the jobs he's being given. He's supposed to be head of some organization to reorganize government.
He has an office in the White House.
He has an office in the West Wing of the White House.
But yet he doesn't have a, quote, official title.
Nobody elected him,
no.
did they? Did you vote for Elon Musk to be? I don't think anybody voted for Elon Musk. And yet here he is. And of course, so the term oligarchy has been resurrected. This goes back to the ancient Greeks, right? Talking about the rule by the few and the oligarchy. And of course, we had lots of discussions about oligarchy in the 19th century, the robber barons, and those men, and they were all men at that time, who held positions in the major corporations that were emerging in the late 19th century. And they had undue political power and ability to capture the government and bend it to their will. And we seem to be having a repeat of that in the 21st century with a different set of robber barons, tech billionaires, but they're right there, and their influence is enormous.
And there's some friction there, however. I mean, you look at there's the whole Steve Bannon wing of the Trump folks, and then there's the whole tech wing, and they're not all on the same page. And that all came out during, what was it, the F1 visa situation, where Musk weighed in one way and Bannon weighed in another way, said this is, because they don't like those people coming, those foreigners coming in and taking these jobs, and it became a whole narrative of Americans are basically lazy. That's why these people are coming here to take these jobs. So, but that's a fight. That's an interior fight. But I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to persist.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if that. Bannon and Musk in particular, those two fighting. Those are two heavyweights battling it out.
I think Bannon told Musk he should go back to Africa.
Oh, wow.
Because he's from
Yeah,
South Africa.
Right.
Wow.
All right. Other things that have struck you this first week that worry you
Okay,
about this first week?
Oh, yeah. So, he promised, about the pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists. And so that did happen. And so, there are mixed feelings about that, actually. People who were, let's just get past that. We know he was going to do it. But at the same time, it's the message that it sends, that these people can threaten democracy and be pardoned. So what are you telling other people when they don't like the way an election comes out or the way things are done democratically, that the way to solve this is to act violently? Because in the end, you probably, will get off with it. So there's just a lot there with the people who were pardoned for January 6th. And they're all being interviewed now and sharing their part of the story. And some of them aren't as bad, like they'll say, what we did was wrong, and we're happy to be pardoned, but it sends a bad message to the rest of the country when he does things like that.
Well, the other argument is that some people have said is that in pardoning those people, he basically pardoned himself.
Of
because
course.
It was his behavior that's led to this mob's going to the Capitol in the first place.
Right, yeah. And people were killed, people were harmed. I mean that's very painful to see that that's not being recognized, and they're not paying for that.
Yeah, I feel really bad for the police officers, because I think 140 police officers were hospitalized as a result of that. I mean, we've all seen the film, we've all seen the footage.
Yeah.
And so to say that those people were, quote, hostages, I mean, it's like, really? So you're telling us that we shouldn't believe what we saw with our own eyes that day.
Right.
That somehow that that didn't really happen. I mean, it's a rewriting of history. And like I said, I've read 1984 probably a half a dozen times, and I keep coming back to that. Not to believe what you see with your eyes and hear with your own ears. The truth is what we tell you it is, and that's what's going on here.
Right.
Political gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting with regard to the pardons. Now, Trump has been floating this forever during the campaign, right, that he was going to do this. And but then there were questions. Okay, is which of the January 6th people were going to be pardoned, right? There were quite a few that were convicted and imprisoned, but not all of them were convicted of violent offenses or assaultive offenses. And so there were even some prominent Republicans. Some guy named J.D. Vance. Doesn't he have some role in the government?
Isn't he from your home state?
Yeah, I think so. What position? Oh, he's way down there. He's the lowly vice president. That's far below Elon Musk, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Vance was asked as vice president about the pardons, and he said, oh, well, if people have engaged in assault, if they were violent offenders, then they can't be pardoned, obviously, if they assaulted police officers. And there were several other prominent Republicans who said the same thing. Oh, well, yes, we have to issue some pardons here, but people who engaged in assaults on law enforcement, they can't be. Well, and then, then it was going to be a case-by-case basis, right? Pam Bondi, the woman who has been nominated for Attorney General. This is the second one, right? Somebody already was nominated and flamed out. Thank goodness. But so Bondi was asked about it, and she said, well, I'll have to do a case-by-case basis. And actually, there is an office within the Justice Department to review
and vet pardons.
To vet that whole process. And of course, Trump completely skips over that. And so, case-by-case basis. And apparently the internal team were starting to kind of do a case-by-case thing, and Trump just got, because Trump can't stand any attention to detail. No. He doesn't like to work. Let's just put it that way. He doesn't really want to be president. He doesn't really want to do the hard job of being president. And so they're starting to look at this, and he just says, oh, F it. Just release them all. Oh. I mean, I think that's a pretty accurate, direct quote.
And I think that part of that decision that may have played into that was they figured out or somehow got word that Biden was going to pardon all the January 6th committee people. Because I can see him responding that way, in that petty sort of way, saying, well, if he's going to do that, then I'm going to just let all these people go then. And, like you said, they're talking about, let's just put that behind us, except for Speaker Johnson talked about there's going to be a committee to investigate the January 6th committee.
Oh, goodness.
So are we really putting this behind us, or is that just convenient rhetoric?
We have to move on. We have to move on. And part of the way we move on is to go back and take revenge on people that displeased Donald Trump.
Because that's the other thing I want to, just before we move on. In my mind, I see this entire administration as a platform for retribution and revenge. I mean, he said that when he campaigned months and months ago to his people, I'm going to be a retribution. So if things are starting to play out that way, we shouldn't be surprised. These are the sorts of things that are going to go on. This is time for payback for those folks. And a lot of them believe that.
And that's how we bring down the price of eggs, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's going to be hard, remember? Harder than I thought it was going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, well, the number one thing was Trump wanted to win the presidency again so he could stay out of prison.
Right.
Because it was clear he has committed massive federal crimes. He was going to be convicted. Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, had him nailed on the documents case in Florida and also the insurrection of January 6th. He was going to be convicted on both of those cases, which meant he was going to go to prison if he didn't win the presidency and get his get out of jail free card, which the Supreme Court has given him. And of course, the Justice Department has a policy. It's not anywhere written in the Constitution or the legal system, but the Justice Department has a memorandum of understanding that you don't prosecute a sitting president, which makes some sense. But some of the more egregious crimes certainly need to be paid attention to, but they can't be because of that. So Jack Smith said, I can't do anything now that he's won re-election or won election and for a second term. I can't, through the Justice Department policy, I can't continue these prosecutions. And so he ended up resigning. So that was number one. Number two then was going to be, okay, once Trump felt he was safe, then he was going to take revenge and retribution on everybody who brought him to that point where he was being prosecuted, right? And that the January 6th committee gets thrown in there because they carried out their own separate investigation to try to determine what happened that day. A massive report again, a very excellent effort to document in all the different ways what happened, how police officers were assaulted, who instigated it, and of course Donald Trump was the chief instigator. And so that was, that, which is why Biden, I felt compelled. I mean, I thought it was a little strange. I didn't know if Biden was going to do the pardons or not. But I think Biden just finally at the end was convinced he's going to do this. He is hell-bent on revenge. And so he's going to make the life miserable of all the people who were on that committee and all the people who tried to prosecute him. So I have to issue these pardons, which he did.
Because I think he understood, and I'll explain this to my wife the other day. I said, there's no court in America that's going to convict any of those people, but he can make their lives miserable by investigating them, because then you have to go hire an attorney. That costs a lot of money.
Right.
And you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and for some of those folks, that's a difficult stretch. Mm-hmm. So just making their lives miserable for 2 or 3 years and having you in and out of the courtroom, would be a part of the goal there. So
right. The negative publicity and the heaping of scorn upon them, that's what he was really all about. And he could wag his finger at those people and his supporters. So again, I think when we're looking at these executive orders, I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking, Felix, that yes, one intended audience is his base, right? So you got to throw red meat to the base. You got to continue to give them what they want and say all the right things to keep them ramped up and keep them chomping at the bit to do whatever he wants them to do. The other audience, though, are people who might resist. Right, and that's the other audience for these. So there's 2 intended audiences: one to pump up and one to threaten. Right, and so that's what this whole process has been about. This first week is to again flood the zone with the pumping up the red meat for the base and the threats to the people who might pose some resistance.
I mean, and it's worked. We've seen it with the tech people. It's worked. Those people basically capitulated even before he became president. As soon as the election, after the election and between now and inauguration, it already paid homage to him. So that's the strategy worked. It succeeded.
Anticipatory obedience.
Yeah, that's what they refer to it as.
Anticipatory obedience.
I think Michelle Goldberg talked about that in her column several weeks ago. She wrote about.
And it seems to be working. I mean, not only the tech bros, the billionaires who want to be the oligarchs of our society, but I think the mainstream media, the legacy media, has also engaged in a bit of anticipatory obedience. Well, who owns the Washington Post?
Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos, right? So it seems that the media has been cowed as well. And again, a way to undermine the resistance, right? To get people to obey in advance and to give in, and or simply to become so despairing, so depressed by what's happening that they give up, or that they turn away from politics, that they don't engage. And I think that's a huge problem.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, and I feel that way sometimes. I mean, I feel like, oh man, this is too much to take. I just want to go read about baseball.
Because here's what they know. Here's what we all know. That when the Supreme Court gave former President Trump, now current President Trump, that immunity, basically they've handed him a blank check. He knows that. He's acting as if he can do anything that he wants to do, knowing that none of this is going to go back on him. Why? Because these are considered official acts. So whatever I say, whatever I do, is an official act. You can't do anything to me. Can't be charged with any crimes. And he's the worst person to have that sort of power.
This notion of official acts seems to be quite an elastic concept, doesn't it? I mean, it seems to be stretched to the breaking point to cover. I mean, even when he was talking about his case, his New York case, the criminal case, where he paid off the porn star Stormy Daniels, right? And they were even trying to say that, well, part of what was going on in the discussions there to provide this money to pay off and buy the silence of the porn star Stormy Daniels was part of an official act, because he was president at the time that he took some of these steps to pay her off. How in the world can that be construed as an official act? But that's what I mean. It's so elastic, they're stretching it to cover anything that he does at any particular time, or if he's talking to some other government employee at the time, which, I don't know, that just seems to be so egregiously wrong.
Well, there's a quote from a book that Richard Price wrote about called Clockers. And in that quote, in that book, he talks about there's this main guy who's a drug dealer in there that the police are after. And he has this conversation with him. And basically what he says is, if you go after the king, you best not miss.
Yeah.
Well, the courts and the media on Trump, they missed. And he's still standing, and he knows that.
Yeah.
And so he's going to lord that over folks and say, hey, you can't, I'm bulletproof.
Yeah.
You can't touch me.
He could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
Right.
And that's all come to fruition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he would. Just one final thing on the January 6th pardons, because every single person who was involved in that has been granted a pardon, and that includes, some of the most notorious right-wing figures, violent right-wing extremists who were involved in some of the planning and execution, the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters, Oath Keepers. So even those people were granted pardons, and of course, as you mentioned, they're now out there spouting about how they're going to get retribution against people, and but they're also then kind of still available for Trump to rile up. He doesn't have to give them a direct order, but he can rile them up with a tweet or a message, and expects them maybe to put pressure in certain situations to help him politically. Right?
And here's the other thing that has gone untalked about. In a lot of those cases where those guys were convicted, family and or friends testified against them. What happens to those people when those guys show up back at home?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You've put their lives in danger and jeopardy as well. There was one story with a young kid, I don't know if it was the Stuart Rhodes or one of the other guys, his teenage son cooperated with the FBI and fed them information about what his father was doing, the fact that he showed up at the Capitol that day, and that's what they used to arrest him. And well, he now knows that. And he's going to be returning to that home?
Yeah.
How do we think things are going to go between that father and that son?
Yeah.
Not very well.
Not very well, yeah. There is some evidence that not very many people, even among Republicans, are in agreement with giving pardons to the violent people who violently assaulted police officers. I mean, the Republican Party has always been the party of law and order, right? At least since the Richard Nixon days. And support your local police, support the blue. And yet now they seem to be okay with letting people who assaulted police officers go scot-free. But again, some of them are not buying into that. So it's interesting that whether this will in some senses come back to haunt Trump and the Republicans as they try to move forward on their agenda. Have they alienated some of their base by this particular action?
Well, that's the irony of it. He's still, going into the election, knowing what we know, he still was endorsed by the National Fraternal Order of Police. They still endorsed him. They didn't endorse Kamala Harris. They endorsed Trump. Knowing that he took this position and knowing that he was saying he was going to look at the possibility of, pardoning all these people, they still supported him. So it's that sort of, that cognitive dissonance that seems to exist in the Republican Party, front and center there.
And then there was crickets from them for the first couple of days after the pardon. They didn't even make an official statement. When they did finally make a statement, it was a very mealy-mouthed, kind of half-hearted protest against it. And then, of course, they had to throw in Biden, because Biden also had pardoned somebody who had assaulted a police officer. And that was their Leonard Peltier, that they, and of course, the prosecutor who prosecuted him says he thinks he's innocent. So, and he's been in prison for what, 40 years?
40 years.
And he's in his 80s and in ill health, and he's still going to be in home confinement. It's not like he got completely released. But that one incident from 40, 50 years ago, they're pulling out, and so they can throw shade at both Trump and Biden at the same time.
And I don't think those sets of pardons, they don't even compare.
Right.
There's no comparison to be made between those two groups of pardons. So.
But that was their way out.
Yeah.
They didn't want to make any kind of statement, but they were forced to by the circumstances. People kept coming to them and asking them about it, and so they had to find some way to make a comment without really getting on Trump's bad side or really criticizing Trump. All right. What else do we have? How about the war on DEI?
Ooh. Yeah, everybody's talking about this and what impacts it will have. So people are sharing the memos that they're getting, these strongly worded memos. If you're working in the government, about how this is going to happen, you know, which ones are closing, if you're doing anything, any coded words that are related.
I'm wondering what those codes are,
I
you know.
don't know. But yeah. I mean, it has a lot of people very nervous about their jobs, even if you're not in federal government, but how this is going to play out in other places. Because we've seen even corporations now are pulling back,
Yep.
you know, cutting their DEI programs, and they were doing that in December, or knowing when Trump was going to come into office, that they didn't want to be on the bad side of this. Like, if this is how we're going to do business now, let's abolish this. So yes, very nervous about that, because we know the impact that when we don't have these sorts of programs, representation isn't there. We don't have diverse representation. We don't have equality. We don't have equity. So we are in need of these things. So people have to think about other ways to make sure that these values are upheld in our institutions.
Yeah, because not only did he do that, and we talked about this before, he went back to Johnson's directive on non-discriminatory practices in the federal government, which was the basis of affirmative action. And that's why I found it so ironic. The underlying philosophy behind anti-DEI and anti-affirmative action is that the folks who advance in organizations based on these programs are inherently unqualified. While at the same time, we're interviewing Pete Hegseth to be the head of the Department of Defense, who is, we all know by the metrics, inherently unqualified,
Right.
yet they asked him no questions about his qualifications at all that day when he was going through confirmations. Suddenly that didn't matter anymore. So it's a problem if it's black and brown people in organizations, but like you said when we talked about this, but if it's a white male, that's the only thing he needs to qualify to have the job.
If you're a white male and you have the right ideology, you're qualified automatically.
I mean, here's a guy who basically bankrupted two charitable organizations that he worked for, a track record of alcoholism, a track record of womanizing that's out there for everybody to see, but he's going to be in charge of 3 million people.
Yeah.
He's never been in charge of more than 100 people in his life, and when he had the chance to be in charge of that many people, he messed it up. But somehow he's qualified to do this job.
Right.
And I found it fascinating listening to one of the senators from Oklahoma say that, well, that's maybe just what we need. Somebody who has this unique skill set. And I'm thinking, well, what exactly are these skills that you're talking about? Because he's not qualified to do the job. He's not getting this job based on the merits. Because that's the argument he kept talking about, that we're going to restore the meritocracy and people getting in positions who are qualified. And you're saying this, and you don't have the qualifications for the job that you're applying for.
Right.
It just was ironic.
Yeah. It seems to me that this war on DEI is just another form of systemic racism
Yep.
that's masquerading as some kind of equality. You know, where we're going to make everything's equal now. Everybody has an equal chance, equal standing, and again, a meritocracy. Those that have the most merit, the best skills will rise to the top. Well, again, number one, that ignores, hundreds of years of institutional racism in the United States and sexism. And again, it just ignores how the social system itself has been set up to disqualify and hold down some people, and to somehow pretend that, okay, now, well, in the 21st century, everybody's equal, right? All that's in the past, right? No. Who was it? William Faulkner said, the past is not dead. It's not even past.
Let me read you this quote from Fran Lebowitz. And Fran Lebowitz wrote this in Vanity Fair in October 1997. She was a humorist and a comedian. She was talking about race. And what she said was, the way to approach it, I think, is not to ask, what would it be like to be black, but to seriously consider what it is like to be white. She said, that's something that white people almost never think about. And what it's like to be white is not to say we have to level the playing field, but to acknowledge that not only do white people own the playing field, but they have so designated this plot of land as a playing field to begin with. White people are the playing field. The advantage of being white is so extreme, so overwhelming, so immense that to use the word advantage at all is misleading, since it implies a kind of parity that simply does not exist. And she was writing this in 1997.
Yeah.
But it applies today.
Yeah.
Right.
There's never been a level playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems to me that they've touched on something that they think can, again, masquerade, right? DEI. Well, what does DEI even stand for? Diversity,
Equity and inclusion.
Right? Now, if you just ask people kind of fresh on the street, right? Do you believe that there should be diversity in our society, diversity in your life? Do you think there should be equity in how people are treated? Do you think there should be inclusion, that all people should? I mean, probably the vast majority of people, if you just took those things separately, separated out from this political theater, would say, yeah, those are good concepts. I agree with those things. Those are things we should strive for in our lives and in our society. And so, but somehow now they've weaponized DEI, and it protects them from charges of racism, because it's DEI. It's not black people or brown people. It's DEI. They don't have to even associate it with race or with gender. It provides them with this masquerade, this out to carry out racist activities without having, with being protected from being accused of being racist, right?
I mean, you see that DEI allegedly was the cause of the fires in California. It allegedly was the cause of that ship crashing into that bridge in Baltimore. You see it injected in all these things because it's the new pejorative.
Yeah.
It's to say that, well, the people who are involved in these things are incompetent. But I don't ever have to use the word black, but that's what everybody knows what they mean.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And I don't provide any evidence or any facts about this as well. Yeah. So, but this is. So this has been a long-standing thing that the Republican Party has been doing, but now under the new administration, it's being ramped up to the highest levels, and it's it's being forced into the corporate life, into university systems, and it's going to have very devastating effects.
Oh yeah.
It's really going to be harmful, and it's going to set back any effort that we've made to generate equality, economic or social equality in our society.
All while hiding behind this concept that we have this meritocracy that existed before all these things came into place, and they sort of upset the apple cart. So now we're going to go back to that, and as we all know that we never had a meritocracy. That word means something on a whole lot of levels. But it's never been a level playing field at any time in the United States. If you go back to the 19-teens and 1920s and look at the Ivy League, when they thought that they might be overrun by bright and brilliant folks from the Jewish community, what did they do? They put quotas on all the schools in the Ivy League. They didn't want a level playing field. They didn't want to have to compete.
Right.
And it's the same way now.
Yeah, it's a very regressive, very regressive policy. Oh, well, boy. What else?
So
what else is on your list of things?
Well,
that we
yeah,
need
let's
to
talk
focus
about the environment and his policies. And we were all excited back Biden and the IRA and all these things to build the infrastructure for alternative energy and all of that. And Trump has always said that is a waste of time and money and resources, and I'm going to shift the other way. And so we are now seeing that in many levels. So first, we're talking about the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and how the impact that will have globally if we're not helping those other countries and paying our fair share into those funds to help the other countries. And then the message that it sends other people that if the U.S. doesn't have to do it, why should we do it?
Right.
So we are going to see steps back. and climate change issues that we're seeing. And it's going to happen really fast. And people are being impacted daily. And we're being impacted daily by these decisions that we're making not to reduce our carbon emissions.
I mean,
And
the
that's very
electric
scary.
mandates are just backing away from those as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
Which the
yeah.
corporations, the companies, the car companies are saying, wait a minute, we just sunk a big chunk of money into this the last 15 years, and now you're telling us that that's all by the wayside?
Yep.
All these things with electric cars that were going to help us transition to a more clean energy, and you're just saying you don't care about that anymore. We're going to go back to drilling and pumping out fossil fuels. You know?
Drill, baby, drill. Yeah, the ending of the EV subsidies is
I wonder how that sits with Elon Musk. I mean, really.
I know.
Yeah,
This is his
yeah.
business.
I mean,
Yeah,
he has an electric car company,
Yeah.
so what are they going to put a carve out for him in there? I'm curious to see how that all plays
yeah.
out.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see about that. The declaration of an energy emergency, which is totally bogus. I mean, here, and again, I harp on this all the time, but almost everything Donald Trump says is false. Almost every statement he makes in any kind of forum is not true. There are no facts, there's no empirical evidence, there's no logic behind what he says, except for him advancing a political and ideological agenda. But there's no truth to what he says. So now he says he's going to declare an energy emergency. Well, there is no energy emergency, right?
Last time I checked.
But what's this going to allow him to do? It's going to allow him the opportunity to allow for more drilling on federal lands and to impose other kinds of policies to favor fossil fuel companies and to harm alternative energy, clean energy initiatives.
Right at the time when the cost of those alternatives was on par with fossil fuels. It didn't used to be that way 20 years ago, but now it is.
Now it is. There's been dramatic shift there. And of course, in the long run, this will be devastating to the American economy, right? I mean, it's not just, obviously the biggest concern is with global warming and climate change, right? But even putting that aside, if you think about, again, the way the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, was investing funds in helping to build different kinds of infrastructure, creating jobs, creating new companies, creating new opportunities, that's going to go by the wayside now. But the Chinese aren't going to stop doing that.
They're smiling.
They're smiling because they're going to be able to, well, they already were dominating that market. They were ahead of us on the clean energy market, despite the fact that they're also building lots of coal plants that still because of their economic development. But they were making tremendous advances and are making tremendous advances on alternative energy. And now they're going to have an open road to do that, or other countries from in other parts of the world.
They'll be able to dominate all the European markets because all the European markets are definitely going electric. So that's a market that we would be selling automobiles to that we're not going to be able to sell cars to anymore. If we go back to just building gas-powered cars, we're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no long-term thought process when he says these things, you know.
You know, he just has when he gets a certain prejudice, and he just sticks with it, despite any facts, without any, rationality, without any thought to how this really impacts American workers and the American economy.
But that's the whole Orwell thing. In the Orwell thing, there is no world in which facts matter.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party seems to have adapted. If we can take that off the table, then what you have to believe is what we tell you.
Right.
Truth is what we tell you truth is. Those facts, that stuff like those fact checking, none of that stuff matters. What we're telling you is what you need to believe. So don't listen to the media. They're not telling you anything that's of any substance. Listen to us. We know better than you do.
And again, as you pointed out, Regina, the tragedy is by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, we are damaging the international efforts to deal with climate change, which have not been going well anyhow. I mean, if we look at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the various conference of parties that have been a part of that, not a great amount of progress has been made. Paris was the breakthrough where we at least got all the countries of the world to say, hey, we're going to try to do something. We voluntarily pledged to do something to
Right.
reduce carbon emissions, weak as that was. And of course, much more needed to be done. But since then, we really haven't seen much progress. And each one of these conference of parties the last couple of years have kind of ended in disarray and with a weak agreement that was cobbled together at the end. And some of it, of course, has to do with providing financing to countries in the global south to help them deal with reducing their own carbon emissions, but also in terms of how they're going to adapt to the climate disruptions that are already taking place, right?
And I think they were hobbled because the rest of the world didn't really believe they could trust us. What's going to happen in 4 years if a new regime comes in? Are you guys going to pull back, which is exactly what we're doing now?
Exactly what's happening.
So why should we dig? So why should these other countries dig in with both heels when we don't know if you guys are going to be at the table 4 years from now?
Right.
And that's proved to be, correct.
Yeah.
Because we've backed away again.
Yeah. And the United States has to be the leader.
Exactly.
It does have to take the lead, or in these international negotiations, or nothing's going to happen. And so now, I mean, the first Trump administration damaged that possibility that the U.S. would be a reliable partner, and again created that doubt. Now Trump's back in, and again we're seeing that all this effort is going to be trashed. And again, we're back to being the country that needs to be at the table but won't be at the table.
But we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico, call it Gulf America. That will definitely send a message to the rest of the world.
I know.
Yes, yes, it does.
I don't know what the message is, but it sends a message.
Yeah. Well, so what we're going to have, as we had during the first Trump administration, what we're going to have again is not only a war on DEI, but a war on science.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, and so that's very clear with regard to the climate issue. So soon, anything in the federal government that refers to climate change, global warming, is going to be stripped away and be gone down the rabbit hole. And of course, at a time when massive hurricanes batter Florida and impact even North Carolina, and extreme wildfires are burning LA, we're saying we're not going to do anything. In fact, he said he might even get rid of FEMA. Boy, what do you think the people in the South who get battered by hurricanes are going to think about that if they take away FEMA? Yeah, are they going to pay for all the things?
No.
Yeah. Somebody, Christian Parente, once said, climate change will make you love big government. If you're the victim of those floods and those hurricanes or those wildfires, you're going to want the federal government to be there. You're going to want FEMA to come in and help you provide the assistance. You're going to need it to survive.
Yeah.
And so you're going to love the fact that the federal government is organized to try to do that. Now, if we're taking that away, people are going to be left on their own, and the disasters will simply mount up on each other.
And the bigger story is not only it's a war on expertise in general. So any of the federal agencies that have expertise that are science adjacent, they're also going to come under attack.
And in particular, we're already seeing this with regard to health and federal health agencies, right? Already there's been a ban on releasing any new scientific information or any kind of new health warnings. And once Bobby Kennedy gets in there, we're going to really see the assault on science-based health policies, right? We're off into conspiracy land and crackpot ideas. And so the health of the American people will be dramatically affected by this war on health science and by these policies by conspiracy theorists and crackpots who are going to take over our federal health agencies or dismantle our federal health agencies.
I think the author Kurt Anderson referred to it as a return to fantasy land in his book when he talked about, the conspiracy theorists and all that stuff. That's basically a fantasy land that they want us to live in, where the only expertise or the only knowledge that matters is what comes from the top.
Yeah. Speaking of the price of eggs, So one of the other things that and Trump has been talking about and has already mentioned and threatening the rest of the world, he's going to impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And then he actually, through Zoom at the Davos meeting, was threatening the rest of the world that, we're gonna put tariffs on you if you don't do whatever we say. What we say goes. And there was a Noam Chomsky book one time, What We Say Goes, and of course, meaning the U.S. imperial domination of the rest of the world. So the tariffs are going to be imposed, it seems clear, despite the fact that all the evidence suggests that imposing these tariffs is a terrible economic idea.
It's going to raise the price.
It's going to raise prices for,
consumers,
the price of everything is going to go up if the tariff is slapped onto it. It's not that the other countries have to pay that. It's going to be paid by the consumer who buys it. And it's going to just lead to an all-out trade war, tariff war, which is going to be devastating to the world economy. And so, and I can't understand how even some of the larger corporations who understand how devastating this might be are not being able to get through the propaganda here to convince the administration that this is, it might have sounded good on the campaign trail, but if you do this, it's really going to be pretty devastating economically. This is one campaign pledge you can safely ignore to the betterment of the American economy, right? But is that going to happen?
I don't think so. I don't see it happening. I think he's going to have to get burned and realize that his hand's on fire before he realizes that this whole tariff thing is not a good idea, because he doesn't understand tariffs, for one thing. I mean, it's a nice little sound bite, but in terms of the actual details of how that works and the impact that it has on consumers, he doesn't get that part. He looks at it as it's a tax those other people are going to be paying to us. Well, no, actually, it's American consumers who are going to get hurt. Because we import more stuff than any other countries all over the world do. That means those prices are going to go up.
Yeah, exactly.
So the price of eggs that he was worried about and other commodities, those things are going to go up. They're going to cost more.
Yeah, I heard him say to some people, well, if you don't want to pay the tariffs, then put your manufacturing here in the U.S. And we have tax breaks for all that. Come on and do that. If you don't, but if not, you're going to get, you're going to deal with the tariffs. So, in his mind, it's as simple as that.
I mean, those companies offshored their businesses because they could get cheaper labor. They come back here.
Exactly. They're not going to do that.
They're going to have to pay Americans and have to pay them a higher wage.
There's a reason they're not here, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so we've covered a lot of ground, and again, we're only a few days into the administration, and of course there was this flurry of executive orders.
Seems like a year already.
Has it been a week? No.
Meant to disorient and disrupt us and cause us to sit around a table and complain about these things. That's exactly what they wanted to happen. But what do you see happening now? We only have about a few minutes left. So each of you, where do you think we're going to go? Not week one, but month one, month two. As we move along into the administration, what do you think how's this going to shake out?
I've been talking to people locally about this who will be impacted by changes, like federal funding if they're impacted by DEI. And the thing is that now the community needs to step up and fill that gap. So if we want some of these services that the government's not going to provide for us, how does the community figure out how to take care of each other? Where are private donors who believe in these things, who are going to circumvent that process to take care of us? So I think we're going to see more community organizing to deal with some of these changes. As otherwise, like you said, people just get overwhelmed and say, we can't do anything, but we can. We do still have power in this, and we need to remember that.
See, and my thing is, I'm really curious to see what happens at the legislative level, because we fired off all these executive orders. What happens when those first big guns go silent, and you actually have to get down to the business of governing? What's going to come out of the legislature? What are they going to do in terms of balancing the budget that they say is such an important thing for them? How are you going to pay for all this stuff? How are you going to pay for the mass deportation? How are you going to pay for these permanent tax cuts? How's that all going to work out? And who's going to be impacted by the changes that they talk about with Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security? They say those things are off the table, but where are you going to get the money from to cover these costs? And I'm really interested to see what happens at the legislative level.
Especially that, given that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives is razor thin, they really can't afford to lose more than 2 or 3 votes on any initiative. If the Democrats hold together for the Republicans to pass anything in the House of Representatives, they have to keep on board, and they have a very fractious set of caucuses within the Republican Party, and we've already seen, again, just in the battle over who's going to be the Speaker of the House several times now, and in other kinds of issues. And so it's going to be really interesting to me to see how Mike Johnson, as the Speaker, is going to be able to hold together his Republican constituency within the House to pass anything.
Yeah, because I see them overstepping their mandate, their perceived mandate. I see them overstepping it. I mean, they're arrogant and they're full of themselves right now, so that makes you prone to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the Senate side, again, again, a pretty thin majority, but a pretty thin majority. And so, again, but again, this is my major concern, is that Republican senators who know better aren't stepping up.
Nope.
And I mean, Lisa McCarskey and Susan Collins are stepping up a little bit, but they need more support. And right now, it's everybody's bending the knee and kissing the ring, sycophants all around in the Republican Party. Nobody, the Republicans that I knew growing up, I think would be in total dismay over what their party has become. The Mark Hatfields and Howard Bakers of the world, I don't think they would recognize the political party that they belong to.
I'm extremely curious to see how this plays out with Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
Who's no big fan of Trump, who I think would relish, given the right set of circumstances, an opportunity for revenge against them. So I want to see how that plays out as well.
We'll have to see where Mitch goes. Well, we just have 1 minute left. I want to thank both of you for being with us today. Again, this is just the opening salvo, right? This is just the first few days. And so 4 more years of this kind of chaos and government is going to be, but we'll be there to cover it. We're going to try to, I think the most important part of resistance is to speak truth to power, right? To put out the facts. People don't believe the facts, and they're trying to undermine the facts, but again, I think one of the most important things we can do is try to analyze things and present the facts, look at the evidence in a logical and coherent way, and try to convince people or show people what the reality is out there.
For sure.
That's one of the most important things that we can do. So we'll try to do that. We pledge to do that for you. Thank you for joining us on Critical Issues, Alternative Views.